Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Madoff. I'm the product manager for Voltaire at IOG. Before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment to remember my predecessor, Phil Chang, who passed away earlier this year. Phil was really passionate about the power of decentralized governance to bring about a better world. And as we enter the age of Voltaire, I wanted to acknowledge his legacy and contributions to the field that have made this day possible. Yes. Thank you, Phil. So how many of you caught Charles's amazing whiteboard keynote yesterday? So as a product manager, I have the dream job of bringing that from the whiteboard into reality. And I've been thinking a lot about what that means as a student of history and of political philosophy. I've been thinking about the choice of Voltaire as the historical figure that is representing this segment of the Cardano roadmap. And Voltaire lived through a time of great technological and social upheaval where the institutions of the time were being called into question. And as a foundational thinker of the Enlightenment, Voltaire started a discourse that changed the paradigm for human interaction, for governance, and that's really a lot of what we're trying to do today to transform Cardano into this self-sustaining system where we're defining the foundational standards for governance and blockchain technology. And there's a quote from Voltaire that I really like that may be apocryphal. We were trying to find the source of it yesterday, but he once supposedly said, "No problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking." So taking these first steps towards Voltaire, there were three key principles that Charles outlined for us yesterday. The first one, democratic consent, ensuring that everything we do has legitimacy in the eyes of the ADA holder community. The second being institutions. There are physical institutions like companies that are led by people, and then there are soft power institutions, norms, conventions, standards that we all agree on and live by. And then finally, leadership, the most important component of this. There's already been amazing examples of leadership from within this community, from places like Project Catalyst and beyond. And what we're really doing here is looking to elevate those leaders we already have to the next level. Our first step is going to be the co-creation of this member-based organization, binding these concepts together with an institutional fabric. And Johnny's going to talk to us a bit more about that later. But first, moving towards community governance. So Voltaire is the next stage in the continued and growing involvement of the community in the governance and oversight of the Cardano ecosystem. The community's here and has always been here, but their power is being unlocked to further maximize their contribution and participation in the ecosystem. Thinking back on Voltaire, the writer, he was a master of symbolism and metaphor, and we're not just telling the story of Cardano here together, but we're showing the world what is possible by setting the standard for decentralized governance in blockchain and hopefully beyond in the wider world, setting that example of how people can really work together. So there are four key pillars of Voltaire on the product roadmap that we'd like to share with you today. The first we've already mentioned, the member-based organization, that anchor institution, the institutional fabric, and Johnny's going to tell us more about that later. Second, we're going to introduce the concept of a Cardano constitution that is going to be the bedrock, the guardrails that bind the community together, and we're going to hear about that from Joel coming up. But I'm going to talk to you now about one component, on-chain governance, as well as liquid democracy. So if Cardano is going to become the financial operating system of the world, it has to be able to evolve and adapt to the needs of its citizens. We have to balance being open and inclusive while maintaining security and checks and balances. So how many of you had a chance to read SIP 1694 after you got home from the event last night? Amazing work from Jared and the rest of the engineering team. And so I know there's a lot going on this slide, but I just want to tell you a bit more about the story and how we imagine this process of governance taking place in practice. And so in reality, how are people going to use the system that's proposed in the SIP? It's a combination of on-chain and off-chain processes. So beginning with the proposal stage, after something has been debated within the community, a change to the parameters, a movement of the treasury, maybe a new hard fork, to have an open system, we have this idea that anyone can post a transaction that is a proposal to change the Cardano blockchain. Next, we imagine the MBO is going to conduct some kind of review to do technical analysis, understanding the impact and the feasibility of what's being proposed, but importantly, doesn't have the power to veto any proposal, merely making a recommendation. Next, we'll have a ratification stage by a constitutional committee, which we'll talk about in more detail coming up. And then in the event of a hard fork, and getting back to this principle of security and checks and balances for these biggest and most consequential decisions, the stake pool operators will have the chance to have their say as well. And then finally, once through all of those stages, we'll move through to enactment on-chain automatically by the protocol. And then a later stage will introduce this concept of liquid democracy. And I wish we could say we came up with this, but actually the concept of liquid democracy has existed for over 100 years. It was actually invented by a man named Charles Dodson, who was also the author of Alice in Wonderland, interestingly. He first envisioned this concept of transitive or liquid voting, but to this day, we haven't seen a really successful real-world implementation of liquid democracy. And the idea here is that the voting rights of the individual are always retained by the holder. And you're delegating that voting power in a way that is fluid and tactile and empowering, and unlocking the ability of passive citizenry into active participation. And through blockchain technology, we're getting to pioneer this concept on Cardano, which is really exciting. So more to come on this later, but I want to turn it over to my colleague Johnny here to talk us through the next step in this journey, which is the member-based organization. Johnny.
Thank you, Michael. So my name is Johnny Nguyen. I'm passionate about open source, and I'm responsible for facilitating this journey with the community and co-creating the MBO. So Michael talked about how Cardano as a public permissionless platform and protocol can evolve, but as a protocol, it's neutral. It doesn't have an opinion on what is the right way to evolve. And so in order for us to determine and achieve some level of social consensus, we have to have a vision for how we're going to bring the community together. And I'll start with that vision. I think it's worth taking a moment to just read this here. The vision for the Cardano MBO is to serve as the aggregation point of the entire Cardano community and its members. The members-based organization aims to uncover the community's pains and desires, facilitating the development of strategies to address them, and attracting firms and individuals with the capacity and the capability to do so. So let's take a moment to just look at each of those more salient points. First, let's look at the notion of the entire Cardano community. I believe in a notion of radical inclusion. The Cardano community is diverse, spans all over the world, and I think we need to capture the essence of that entire Cardano community. The MBO aims to uncover the community's pains and desires and facilitating. So the MBO is not responsible for solely by itself developing that strategy and uncovering those pains and desires, but rather to facilitate the community arriving at those conclusions of its own volition. So the next part is really about attracting firms and individuals with the capacity and the capability to do so. Charles yesterday in his keynote mentioned 13 firms already working on Cardano. They often work quietly in the background, working on things like Mithril, Hydra, the Node, and many other important projects. But it's time that these firms were brought into the forefront and given the limelight and given an opportunity to talk about what they do and why what they do helps supercharge and evolve Cardano. So let's talk about why a members-based organization would be valuable and needed for the Cardano ecosystem. Time and time again, the Cardano community has proven that all of us are smarter than one of us. And in order to collaborate and bring all those members of the community together, a neutral home for open source increases the likelihood and the willingness of individual developers, firms, enterprises to contribute to that ecosystem. And once everybody's there and they agree to work on these principles in the spirit of open source, we believe that collaboration can be our superpower. So let's talk about what constituencies are better served under the MBO, because certainly all of these constituencies exist today, but they exist in fragmented segments and pockets of the community. And having a virtual town square where people can come together and be more effective in how they interact and talk and commingle with one another will allow us to achieve some level of social consensus and move this ecosystem forward. So the first constituency served are the projects. These are projects, some that you may be aware of. The Cardano node certainly stands out as one. The Hydra protocol, Mithril, and there's also a ton more. But without these projects, these are the most important projects in the Cardano ecosystem. And without them, there is nothing to gather around. There is no Cardano. So these projects form the foundation, the bedrock of what is true and good about Cardano. Then I'll start on the other side, the end users. Right? The end users are everybody like myself that uses Cardano on a day-to-day basis. Right? Whether it's sending some tokens to friends and family, whether it's paying for things, whether it's buying an NFT. The lived experiences of these end users, governments, enterprises, institutions, individuals, make up our collective pains and desires. And the members of the Cardano members-based organization are those companies and firms that are both building Cardano, building on Cardano, and hopefully someday deploying, betting on, and depending on Cardano. The members are the firms that are trying to address the needs and solve the pains of the end users, and they depend on and use those projects that make up Cardano. So what is the Cardano MBO? The Cardano MBO is one of many stakeholders in a multi-stakeholder ecosystem that attempts to look after and steward the evolution of Cardano. And so by having the ability to come together and look after those underlying blueprints and technology that make up Cardano, its most important projects, and to aggregate that knowledge, those code bases, and those contributors, the MBO seeks to help Cardano recursively self-evolve. It'll also be an administrator of many of the key processes. Now, these processes exist all over the place. They exist as CalPads and conventions and common understanding. But what if they could evolve into something more than just common understanding, but to become standard operating procedures? As Cardano's a public permissionless protocol, it can evolve in any number of ways. But what is the best way? And so bringing everybody together to agree on a roadmap and development of this platform and protocol is the primary objective of the Cardano MBO. So let's talk a little bit more and dive down a little bit deeper about what the MBO does. First and foremost, it facilitates dialogue and discussion. Often today, that dialogue and discussion happens in a number of fragmented spheres. It happens on Twitter, we all know that. It happens on Reddit. It happens on the forums. It happens in your homes and communities. The MBO seeks to bring those dialogues, discussions, and debates into the public sphere, into this virtual town square. It also serves as a home for open source projects. So when we talk about those open source projects like the Cardano node, there's also a lot more. I mean, I'm a big fan of what the TX Pipe team is doing at Aura, and what Alessandro Berri is doing with Lucid, and what Matthias Bancourt has done with Ogmios. In fact, today, I'll be going to Lausanne, and tomorrow morning I'll be moderating a panel on open source. But the MBO aims to become the home for many of those open source projects, and if the contributors and the communities around those projects are willing, I think the MBO would love to host them and provide them a home. The MBO also aggregates the expert class, right? And so we have a lot of experts in the Cardano community, and they have limited reach. They have reach within their immediate spheres, and many of them don't even have social media profiles or avoid social media altogether. But what if we could give them a space where they could come together and debate and discuss? They don't always have to agree, but we want to provide the ability for them to converge. The MBO also uncovers the pains and desires. We've talked about this, and I think it's important to never forget that, because the pains and desires of the end users of Cardano are ultimately what determines how the Cardano ecosystem should evolve. The MBO also responds with changes and solutions. There's often been some discussion and complaints that perhaps Cardano's slow to evolve because people have a hard time knowing where to go to complain. Where's the 1-800 hotline for, how do I speak to a manager? Well, there is no manager. There is no CEO of Cardano. You are the CEO of Cardano. The community is the CEO of Cardano. And bringing that community together will allow the community to determine what's the best path forward. The MBO also supports and supercharges the projects that make up Cardano. Many of these projects, we often know about sustainability and maintainer burnout of open source projects. If these open source projects could get a level of support and awareness and just a community being built around them, perhaps they could thrive and grow even more vibrant and diverse. And last but not least, the MBO administers programs. And there's a Cardano treasury, and that treasury can be deployed to unlock the full potential and help Cardano update itself. But in order to unlock that treasury, there has to be some notion of democratic consent on how to best direct and use that treasury. And the MBO aims to facilitate and ultimately arrive at some notion of social consensus on how to direct that treasury. And so last but not least, I want to kind of provide a high-level overview. And this is intentionally high-level because we are going to go on this journey as a community together. The community is going to be involved in the co-creation of this members-based organization. And at the top here, you'll see there's this notion of the Cardano Constitution. That Constitution provides the bedrock foundational guardrails for everything that is true and right in the Cardano ecosystem. And the MBO, as one of the many institutions that will arise, needs to exist within that construct. The MBO will also have its own charter that constrains it and gives it a mandate and knows that constrains how it will evolve in itself. At the other end of this, we had talked about the notion of the open source program office and the projects. These projects are going to need the support of an open source program office, and it's a model, this entire construct, in fact, is modeled after many successful open source foundations out in the wild today, things like Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the Linux Foundation, and many, many others. The end users are the folks that use the projects and use the platform and protocol that's enabled by these projects. The members aim to support those projects and address the needs of end users, and the members registers their support for the ongoing evolution of the Cardano ecosystem and these projects by paying dues and participating in the governance process of the members-based organization. A lot of the day-to-day work that happens in the context of working groups. In fact, we have a number of working groups already actively engaged today. There's a developer experience working group, a stablecoins working group, and these are just community members that are gathering on a weekly basis to discuss paths forward, to put their heads together to determine how to write SIPs and how to modify and propose implementations. The working groups are fluid. They can evolve and come and go as needed, but the committees are the ones that determine which working groups should be active at any given point in time. And those committees and councils are facilitated by a professional staff within the members-based organization. The professional staff is often selected and hired and evaluated and given a mandate and a direction by a governing board that consists of key members within the members-based organization that have proven through merit that they deserve to be in leadership positions. And so with that, I want to provide a call to action. Here's your opportunity. This is our moment for the Cardano ecosystem and for the community to come together, register your interest, sign up, and in the new year, we hope to begin co-creating and facilitating focus groups with you. Thank you.
So we have a question from Peter B. How can I, a simple man, help with governance? I can't code, but I love and understand for a big part the goal of the project. Can I sign up somewhere to help with governance?
Well, there will be plenty of opportunities to iterate and define the next level of granularity around those committees and working groups. But the best and most proven way, and this is the way that the MBO and the rest of the ecosystem has agreed to come together, is really through the SIP process, right? And I think it's an impressive and wonderful meta-construct that recently the SIP editors community defined a new SIP, SIP 999, or SIP 0-1, right? I think that's what they call it, that defines a problem statement. It was something that was missing from the SIP process. And so they used the SIP process to fix the SIP process. And, for better or for worse, the SIP process is the most legitimate and legitimized source of truth that we have within the Cardano ecosystem. And it's wonderful that we choose to continue to drink our own champagne.
Yeah, there are many different ways a person can contribute, and that's the point of having a multimodal governance approach. So at the very least would be delegating your stake to somebody to represent you or representing yourself, depending upon the circumstances. So look at SIP 1694 to get a better sense of it. Second, you can participate in the SIP process itself, which is kind of becoming the change management system and the standard system within the Cardano ecosystem. Third, one can join the members-based organization as an individual or a business. And then there are going to be lots of working groups and committees, and what you do is you find the working group or committee that matches your talent and interests. So for example, let's say you're an artist and you're really obsessed with NFTs, but you don't have a lot of technical skills. The point of these mixing pots is that it gives you the ability to express what your needs are as an NFT artist, but then also be able to engage and have dialogue with technical people who understand these things at a very deep level and engage with the SIP editors, and in many cases be able to write a problem statement. For example, I want to do X, Y, Z. And then you can either ask, is this a protocol level concern? So is it Cardano itself? Is this an application level concern? Or is this a specific thing that your business entity can create or partner can create? So that's the point of having this, is it kind of is a giant call to action, and it gives you the ability to find your place and purpose in the ecosystem. And you have an escalation of voice. The bare minimum commitment would be delegation of vote, and the maximum commitment would be getting into the guts of the system and actually writing code and being involved as a SIP editor and so forth. And really, it's to each their own in that respect.
So we've had a couple of questions around similar themes of incentivizations. Let's take the mobile journos here. Many on-chain governance mechanisms on Ethereum provide financial incentives and voting power scaled with capital invested. Is this necessary for driving participation and securing governance?
So you need to have high participation in order for a system to be legitimate. So think of a presidential election. What is your personal threshold before you start believing the government is illegitimate? So let's say half the country votes. Is the president duly elected? Okay, for the most part, people say yes, because U.S. elections run this way, for example, and about half the people eligible to vote, and we seem completely fine with that president being the president. But what if it was 20%? What if it was 10%? What if it was 5%? What if it was 2%? At what point do you consider it no longer to be a representation of the people? The other thing is what constitutes voting power, what constitutes merit. We live in a mono-resource system with Cardano, and that stake is the only way to represent a resource. But that's going to rapidly change as we introduce the MBO concept, the Constitution, these other things, and give different weights and parameters for people to have influence, even if they don't have a lot of ADA in that respect. But it really comes down to participation thresholds.
Yeah, and I think we've learned a lot about the participation model from Project Catalyst and understanding how that works and seeing user behavior there. But also we really want to focus on easing the user experience and lowering the barrier to entry and participation. And we've taken also a look at our stake pool model and thinking about how do individual ADA holders participate in staking and the ease of that experience of being a part of the governance system as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to draw attention to the open source way. We often talk about this notion of enlightened self-interest versus mercenary self-interest. And open source is driven on the principles of enlightened self-interest. Typically, developer has a problem, and in order to scratch their own itch, they go and they build a solution to that, and they write some code. And from that solution, that initial founding of that project, many others are drawn to that, and from that, they form a user base. From that user base, some become enthusiasts, and they become capable and interested in spreading the word and contributing to that project. And from those contributors and those enthusiasts, eventually some become committers and maintainers. And this notion of enlightened self-interest has given us such wonderful things like Linux and Kubernetes and many others today that power most of the world's internet infrastructure.
So we've had lots of great questions. We're going to run out of time now. I'll ask one more. I'll conflate two questions. Lots of opportunities for discussion and dialogue on this going forwards. What role does education play creating a competent community governance framework? And what can the community do to prepare people not watching this? Perhaps, Johnny, you want to take that one as well.
Yeah, in fact, the education is an important component of any members-based organization. But it's not entirely up to an education department or an education team. The community plays a vital role in educating each other. Simple things like writing, there's this type of content or blog called a TIO, Today I Learned. And it's easy to take for granted that maybe the things that I learned today might not be impressive to certain people, but somebody's on that part of the journey, and we're all on different parts of the journey here. And just being able to share with each other on that journey and share that content and allow others to follow along and kind of build that ladder to lift others that are late to the game or just starting their journey. I think that's an important piece of the educational puzzle.
So another thing to add on is that Cardano is almost like a piece of alien technology. You know, it's a lot of magic and a lot of research went into it, and there's 1,000 private decisions that went into that code, 1,000 conversations that the community, because they weren't around for it, didn't have, that give context to why things work the way that they work. So there's a bit of archaeology, there's a bit of discovery that has to occur, and that's really a big chunk of the priority for 2023 is making sure that the documentation, elaboration, enumeration, the understanding, and common state of why we did things the way we did is ubiquitous amongst the community. Because if people don't understand something, they might want to get rid of it and not realize the consequences of it. Imagine if you couldn't read and then you look around at all these books and you say, well, what use are they to me? I should just use them for fire or something like that, and you destroy them. There's plenty of things in life that have been absolutely devastated because of ignorance. And so it's very important, education in that respect. The other side of it is that a lot of these assumptions that went into the design of Cardano ought to be challenged. And so people need a certain level of understanding in order to be competent in challenging them. So new paradigms are going to come. And a definition of success for the MBO is its capacity One of the definitions is going to be its capacity to challenge assumptions that came into the technology. If this is just a game of continuity of one particular philosophy or team indefinitely, I think we've failed to achieve decentralization, and I think we've failed to engage the community. We are stronger and better with a diverse set of opinions and beliefs and ultimately approaches and viewpoints, and the capacity to diverge to compromise viewpoints, which could be radically different from what we intended.
That's all we have time for in terms of questions. As I say, we have got lots more conversations to have over the months ahead. So Charles, Johnny, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.